We will continue here just with a short little introduction. I like intimate conversations more than talk, so. John and Jack came from Parsons, New York. They are very interesting as individuals. They do many different things. But what brought them here is the workshop on social housing by Simplify. And I just want to ask you, why do you think systemic approaches in topics like that are important? What motivates you to do your work?
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us on a beautiful day. The weather is sunny now. Design strategy, or if you want to call it design thinking, or if you want to call it a design approach to complexity, is about recognizing that the world is only becoming more and more complex. I think in the 20th century there was a tendency to want to separate, silo, simplify, and look at things in a very kind of cause and effect, binary way, in order to make decisions, whether they were for social good or for-profit enterprise or governance and policy making. Complexity demands a different approach, simply, that these kinds of cause and effect binaries are often misleading. We might only focus on the symptoms of something. Donella Meadows, who's a very one of the important figures in systems thinking, there's a quote in the beginning of her famous book, Thinking in Systems, from Zen, The Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, that says, if you tear down a factory because it's unsustainable and doing bad things, another one will simply rise up in its place unless we're really considering a much wider system in terms of how that came to be to begin with. So that's a very kind of simple way to consider a systemic approach, but it demands that we hold the idea of complexity, and that demands that our process be one of a kind of research that is different from a scientific approach, not having a hypothesis to test, but a design approach to research, and even more specifically, a participatory design-led research that asks us to kind of maintain not only open eyes in what we endeavor to discover through inquiry, but open minds and also an open heart. How do we enter into these complex ecosystems to be with them more deeply, to allow for emergence, to allow for a co-creative process that then takes into consideration the diverse and complex perspectives of these situations. And certainly, the evolution of housing, public housing, affordable housing, is a situation that is, very rich with perspectives and players and various agents and forces. So that's kind of an overview of why we thought that this kind of approach is appropriate for this topic.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for having us. So, coming from a perspective, I'm a designer and now more recently a policymaker. So, for me, bridging different fields was very important. Not being just a designer, but looking from multiple perspectives. And I work personally in space of participation, community participation, and involving different stakeholders, from citizens, policymakers, designers, is very important. So that's one of my research is on participatory policies and urban processes in New York and Lagos. And for me, it is really important where I'm looking at the grassroots energy that emerges. So policymakers or designers often look at things from top-down perspective, which is very, it excludes a lot of ideas and energy that lives on the ground. And when we really look at things holistically, this is when we get much better and much more rich perspective. And this is for me looking systemically at things.
Thank you so much. I'm sure that you've seen already some changes to some projects. Would you like to maybe give an example about this, if I can go backwards this way? You can maybe give an example from your practice, like from Lagos or from New York, how your work, your systemic approach affects certain project, or maybe you could just give us an example.
So I've been involved in different projects in New York and in Nigeria. Maybe the one that I initiated is in Lagos. It's a green school. So we were invited as designers, anthropologists. First, I work in a really diverse group setting. My partners in the practice that I have, there is a musician, there are two designers, anthropologists, and then we have person that comes from more management perspective. And so we've been working on the Green School initiative in Lagos, which is trying to build first green school in Nigeria, working with urban issues, and how to work with the conditions that are on outside. So we are working with educational or developing educational modules. And working for us, the most important is working with local communities, trying to understand what are really the needs, not us coming from outside, but what people perceive as important things that we should be addressing. And then also we kind of work in a militant and participatory way. It's really important that participants, local communities drive the project. It's not us, the designers, that we are proposing solutions, but trying to understand how people see and what their desires and demands. So we developed, the first issue was in Lagos, 70% of the city doesn't have access to drinking water. And that was like the priority. So we developed a system, rainwater collection system, which actually originates from traditional customary practice. They have been collecting water 100 years ago, but when people move to the cities, they forget, how to, traditional practices. And for us, it's really important to understand these customary practices and try to, reintroduce them in modern or city life. So yeah, that was the first thing. Then we worked also with urban agriculture, with production of electricity, health, and that's just our method is workshopping with local communities and developing ideas together.
My practice and I guess my time has been consumed in the past 7 or 8 years by just a handful of large projects. One of them is the university. My role at the new school and Parsons School of Design has been to, as a faculty member, but also as a program director, to design curriculum, to evolve curriculum that embraces these kinds of approaches of design strategy. And I spent 5 years as the director of a program called Strategic Design and Management, and we have a student from that program with us here in the audience, Karina Wilkerson, who helped us with the workshop yesterday. And next year I start to take over, I lead a program in the Master's Fine Art in Trans-disciplinary Design. We have an alumni from that program, Anton Tran, who is with us here today and was helping with the workshop. These programs are within the school design strategies, again, privileging this notion of complexity, design-led research, multi-stakeholder engagement, co-design, systems thinking. My practice has involved a couple of different research projects. I spent 5 years more, but many years researching and also in the field, doing field work around experiences concerning the end of life. I spent 4 years filming 5 different people at various stages of dying. That project involves many outputs and artifacts or articulations. One of those has been a feature-length documentary film that has played around the world a bit, but it also involves lots of symposia, art installations, and it informs a studio that I lead at Parsons called Design for Living and Dying, in partnership with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. So we look at these kind of larger arcs of a project over time, rather than these kind of shorter transactional ways of thinking of, again, solving problems. We try not to think about problems and solutions. We think about, complex challenges and ways forward, because there are many ways forward. Another project that's quite large and has taken up a bunch of years is called the Light Phone. A strategic advisor of a startup that makes a phone. I was laughing because I was thinking about the water collection, and we look back in time and say, gee, what have we forgotten and what might be important? And the Light Phone is kind of a provocation, asking us to elevate our consciousness around our relationship to technology and our relationship to virtual hyper-connectivity. So it's a small phone that only makes and receives phone calls, which sounds absurd, right? In an age of rapid technology and connectivity and apps, and so it's kind of, I refer to it as a movement. It's a form factor for a movement, so to speak. Again, it's about participating in a conversation that invites a lot of stakeholders and invites a lot of different kinds of conversations and provokes new perspectives in radical ways, rather than this kind of 20th century idea of identify the problem, design the solution. And new work, we have a chapter of the DESIS network at Parsons. DESIS, I'm sure many are familiar, it stands for Design for Social Innovation and Sustainability. It's a network that's across the globe at over 200 universities, and started by Ezio Manzini and Virginia Tassinari. And we do a lot of projects with DESIS that connect to the local community of Greater New York City. And our new work is around the Brooklyn Public Library and how libraries are emerging as these kind of, again, bottom-up grassroots community centers, going above and beyond their traditional role of this is a place where you can get books. And the services that are emerging from the library, a lot of them unofficially, because of the library workers and the communities where the libraries are situated. Again, this notion of situated knowledge, that are providing vital services, again, in a complex ecosystem. So some of these services have to do with housing, have to do with employment, skill building, jobs, families impacted by incarceration, and systems and support for re-entry after incarceration. We have a very serious issue in the United States with incarceration. So this work, again, demands a lot of time, it demands being in the field and working with people. So this is the practice that takes up a lot of my time these days. But I'm very happy to be here with you all. It's been exciting to learn about this community.
Thank you. We have one more question. Time for it. And I'll just maybe start with and go backwards. What is your personal experience? What do you think drove you towards studying, what you do? What is your personal journey, actually, the reasons that you're actually here where you are now, that you could point out, that was essential for going from, if I can call it, classical product design oriented process towards, systemic perspective? What happened in your life personally that you think you ended up in this field, in the complexity of life?
That's interesting. So I started studying architecture here in Ljubljana, and it was very traditional, studying urbanism and architecture. But even that, so in my last year, I spent a year in Istanbul during my Erasmus, and I just got immersed in the city, and it was an incredible experience. And then my thesis was about small interventions in architecture, which was not a classical, architecture thesis. And then I practiced as an architect 7 years, and in 2010 I went to New York. I worked with an architecture firm. It was they have amazing projects. It's a very exciting young practice. But as I was working as an architect, I was like, just wasn't enough working on buildings. There was something else. The communities, the soft architecture, and I was trying to see how I could engage as an architect in that field. And at that time, they just opened a new program at Parsons, which is Design and Urban Ecologies. So I was the first cohort of that program, which basically deals with everything that is not built architecture, it's just soft architecture. It was the most amazing experience. So we went the first semester, we went to Colombia, to Medellin, to work with in a favela with community that was for 20 years, it was in a really hard condition because of all the drug wars, and we stayed with that community. That was part of we stayed for 2 weeks. We lived with the community, we engaged, and we learned. That was like the most eye-opening thing for me, like how the knowledge that people hold, like how they are actually the capacity that they have to think about their own, problems and issues. And I'm still in contact with the director organization, which we collaborated. So she's from the favela. She managed to, she finished her master's in urbanism also, and she works in an organization that practice theater of the oppressed. And through theater, they are solving, issues around drugs, violence. It's just incredible because they're locally based practice, and they're able to do all the things that we would, as designers, usually come, approach, and then envision what we would like to see to happen. So we had the privilege to working with this organization, and I'm actually collaborating with them on a project. It's also an urban project, how to build infrastructure in a city where there is complete absence of government assistance, how communities can build their own water infrastructure, their own electricity. And that's actually what excites me.
I was trained as a fine artist in New York City as an undergraduate at the School of Visual Arts. I was an installation sculptor, conceptual artist. There were not programs like the ones that I teach in at Parsons at that time. It was not this notion of design strategy or trans-disciplinary design or, certainly complex theory and systems thinking has been around a long time, mostly coming out of, kind of the formal sciences, people building rockets and things like that. But I was an artist, and I think that I was most interested in activism from a creative place. I actually really didn't know. I'm not trained as a designer. I worked in media for 30 years in experimental feature films and television, in the music industry. I was a music video director in the early 90s, so it's like, I feel like I've had like 100 different careers. But they all are about the same thing for me, which is a kind of participatory design-led research. Before I had that language, I knew that I wanted to be with people to learn, and I think I was really just motivated by my curiosity, and I privileged my curiosity. Certainly there's lots of people around me who were not very happy about that. Parents or, serious people who were like, you're not very serious, you're not committing to things, and you're not building your resume, and this doesn't make any sense. But I kind of just privileged my curiosity. The early 1980s in New York City, were a very special time for a certain kind of radical approach to struggling to think outside of assumed systems or structures. And I think I was just participating in that from a cultural position. And media and narrative were an important part of that for me, and they still are. A lot of the work we're doing now, and even the work that we did yesterday at the workshop, has a lot to do with not only complexity theory, but narratives, and the narratives of complexity, but also the ways in which design is a gesture of not just storytelling to pitch your idea, but in what ways might we create ethical spectacles that lead us, not just in the name of fantasy or science fiction or speculative design, but in the ways in which we want to envision and create a society that we want to live in, rather than just being reactionary or, again, kind of putting mandates on things. So I kind of was a media maker and an artist for a long time before I went back to school. And I got a graduate degree when I was almost 40. And it was almost a bit of a joke. I said, well, I'm not going to get a fine art degree, because if I really want to participate in changing the world, it seems to be that corporations are commanding the world as late capitalism flourishes. So I have an MBA in sustainable systems, and that was like an unlikely gesture for somebody who was an artist and an activist. And I went to a very experimental program and said, well, yeah, in what ways might we conceive of business, or let's call it organization and agency, through a different lens? How might we approach creative intervention to creating value, considering or redefining value rather than it just being single bottom line? This was radical back then, and still is to some degree. We've come a long way in 15 years, since the 90s and natural capitalism and the early days of the sustainability movement. So that's kind of been my trajectory. I think I was a researcher and an ethnographer before I knew what those words meant. And I was just happy to kind of bump into things that were already emerging at places like Parsons and around the world, places like here that, I kind of found my people. But it certainly wasn't a typical path.
Thank you very much for your little intimate insight. John and Angèle will use their next part of the time on feedbacks, like explaining and showcasing the feedbacks of the workshop. That's why we use this time to talk about other things. So I will thank you for this discussion, and we will move on with the program.